For Tibetans, July has been a month of hope and of tragedy. On July 2nd, Lobga Rangzen, a 52-year-old Tibetan man, set himself alight outside the United Nations headquarters in New York, later dying from his burns. Radio Free Asia reported that Rangzen posted a Facebook video speaking of the importance of efforts to preserve Tibetan language and culture. He also criticized Chinese government policies in Tibet, which he described as an erasure of Tibetan identity, and urged Tibetans in exile to increase their efforts in their struggle. The US State Department made these remarks in response. The United States is committed to supporting the inalienable human rights and aspirations of Tibetans to celebrate and preserve their unique culture, language, and religion without fear of interference. We will continue to call on China to return to direct dialogue without preconditions with the Dalai Lama and his representatives and with the democratically elected Tibetan leaders to resolve differences and achieve meaningful autonomy for Tibetans. And days later, the Dalai Lama celebrated his 91st birthday. Last year, His Holiness said he would live to the age of 130, which would put the issue of Beijing's interference in his succession off another 4 decades. Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Ian Kavat. To discuss this and more, I'm joined by Doma Tsering, National Yangming Jiao Tong University International Center for Culture Studies Research Fellow, and also Sana Hashmi, Taiwan Asia Exchange Foundation Fellow. Welcome both to Taiwan Talks today. Now, the Sikyong of Tibet's government in exile, Pempa Tsering, honoured Mr. Rangzen's tragic sacrifice in a written statement, but he also called on Tibetans to preserve their lives for Tibet's lifelong struggle. He said, the unfolding genocide inside Tibet and the enforcement of the draconian ethnic unity and progress law on July 1st are what drove Lobga Rangzen to this tragic decision. He joins at least 157 Tibetans inside Tibet who have offered their lives to draw global attention to the brutal repression endured under Chinese rule. And speaking of that new Chinese law, US Senator John Curtis said, the Chinese Communist Party's new ethnic conformity law signals an escalation in Beijing's long-standing campaign to erase the cultural identities of Tibetans, Uyghurs, Mongolians, Christians, and other minorities, all while giving the CCP a pretext to intimidate critics far beyond China's borders. Doma, if I could start with you first, could you, give us an overall sense of the feeling amongst the Tibetan community at this point in time, the feeling about Lobga, Mr. Rangzen's death, China's new law? How are they responding?
As Tibetans, we are still processing what happened on 2nd July in front of the United Nations. And for me, it's emotionally, I need to take a lot of courage to speak whenever asked questions about Lobga. That because, and since he set himself on fire on 2nd July, yesterday in Taiwan we marked the 2nd week of his death anniversary and also memorial. We had a prayer and all. So for us, there are a lot of different mix of emotion going on. It's emotions of anger. Tibetans all over the world, including Westerns in India and also Taiwan, has been staging protests in front of the United Nations, calling for their silence on the Tibet issue, and also protesting the chief of the United Nations Human Rights.
So you spoke about the anger as well as the grief. And, is there a sense of frustration and also obviously shared by Mr. Rangzen because, it seems that this wasn't just directed at Beijing. It was outside the UN headquarters. So was this also frustration at the international community for normalizing China's control and its policies?
Absolutely. So if we read his video statement before he set himself on fire, and if we read the act, how it has been carried, the act of self-immolation happened day after the implementations of the so-called ethnic unity and progressive law first. Second is the act happened just in front of the United Nations. And third, when he carried this act, he was holding a Tibetan national flag. Fourth, he was wearing a Tibetan traditional dress that symbolized our identity. Fourth, he was carrying a placard which says "Free Tibet and China out of Tibet." So this act is to call the international community, especially international community like the United Nations, that has we have a United Nations human rights clauses that promises of the protections of the human rights. So that has failed a long time. So in a way, you can say it's a desperate act to call the international community, not just targeting the Chinese ethnic law. So yes, absolutely.
Okay. Now, a fellow Tibetan driver, Lobsang Paudjo, told AM New York that Rangzen was enraged by China's treatment of Tibetans. He said they have to speak the Mandarin language, they must learn Chinese, they must read that literature, they cannot learn anything else. That's the main thing he was worried about. Let's take a look at some of these figures from Tibet.net. There have been a worldwide total of close to 170 recorded Tibetan immolations, with the majority, 157, within China or Tibet Autonomous Region. A much greater incidence occurs, as you can see, outside the so-called Tibet Autonomous Region. And in these figures from SaveTibet.net, there are 11 for self-immolations in exile, with the most recent case being in New York, the first for the United States. Sana, let me ask you, so, what is driving Tibetans to this very extreme act?
This stems from decades of repression, as in this is not a new source of protest. This is something that has been happening for decades. And why is it happening? It's happening because there are policies that are repressive, and after Xi Jinping came to power, the surveillance, the kind of policies that are against Tibetans in Tibet Autonomous Region have intensified sharply. And of course, we have been talking about Hanization of Tibet for such a long time that has become a new norm. I think it's now an old norm, actually. It's not even a new norm, because the international community has also accepted whatever is happening inside Tibet Autonomous Region. And also this entire residential boarding schools where young children are taken away from their families and they are kind of in these somewhat Xinjiang-like re-education camps where they cannot really practice their religion, they have to speak Chinese. So the erasure of Tibetan elements, religion, languages is something that is actually driving Tibetans towards such extreme measures. And also there is hardly any dialogue between Tibetan government in exile and the CCP leadership. So the middle path approach that was proposed by the Dalai Lama, that is accepted by Tibetan government in exile, is hardly accepted by the CCP leadership. So there's hardly any way to generate awareness and to draw the attention of the international community apart from taking extreme measures such as self-immolation.
Yeah. So is the feeling very much that this is the only way to make Tibet visible, Dolma? And when we think about what the normal recourse is for people who want to make a statement in open societies with normal actors, not with China, with normal state actors, what is open to Tibetans? Is it that Tibetans feel that every other avenue is blocked?
It's particularly started increasing since 2008, the crackdowns on Tibetan, and it particularly increased in the 2009. So the space for the collective protest has been shrinking. So when the space for the collective protest is shrinking, the only way is the self-immolation. So self-immolation is not only a desperate act of protest, but it's also somewhere challenges the Chinese colonial, At the same time, Tibetans in Tibet are indirectly resisting the policy in many different ways. So Tibetans are on the one hand, we say that this is, of course, desperate, but on the other hand, we are finding different avenue to talk about Tibet, not only in Tibetans who are living outside Tibet, but also inside. If we now see the different kind of social media, then we see different kind of resistance is coming.
Okay. Now, this is Beijing's response to criticism of the new law.
If you go back to the founding of China in 1949, quite frankly, there were so many different languages. In fact, villages that were 5 miles apart would not speak the same language. They had to use a trade language in between them. China created simplified Chinese. From their perspective, it was absolutely necessary to have a single form of communication. Otherwise, you wouldn't have people, they wouldn't be able to travel, they'd be stuck in their villages and things like this. They wouldn't be able to find new jobs, education would be a problem. So they applied this across the nation.
Sana, Beijing says its policies are just economic, they're practical, this kind of thing is almost like an administrative change or improvement. What do you think?
As in, this is just one way of legitimizing Chinese policies, and of course, this is what they're going to say. And of course, this entire idea from their policies, the narrative is that China is actually supporting the religious freedom, which is actually not real at all. So of course, this is what they're going to say, that the autonomous region, we are trying to fuel policies that are going to make this region more economically developed, like Shanghai, like Shenzhen, like other provinces that are much more developed. So what Chinese are also trying to do, and this is just not a new phenomenon, what they have been trying to do is to portray religion equal to backwardness. So in Tibet as well, this entire idea that there's religious autonomy, but at the same time, they also need to be focused on economic development. I don't think that it could coexist peacefully for the entire world to see. So I don't really see whatever I think the actions are very much different from the words. They do not really align with each other, specifically when it comes to the autonomous regions that China has. But of course, Tibet has become a bigger part of the problem because of the issues such as self-immolation and the diaspora that have been existing in different parts of the world.
Dolma, 1 million Tibetan children basically forcibly assimilated. This is what came out of the UN Special Rapporteur's press release in 2023 through that residential school system, the closure of Tibetan schools, monasteries, the separation of children from their parents. Is this economic?
Absolutely not. When Mao Zedong first invaded Tibet, he said that if we have to safeguard China, its national China as a territory whole, we have to occupy Tibet and take control over the Tibet as a territory and both the population. So what they did in the last 7 decades is during the cultural revolutions, they targeted Tibetan culture, but since Deng Xiaoping, and then we have the Jiang Zemin and then Hu Jintao, they have developed this policy called development and stability. Because we are bringing development, and then that's the only way for bringing stability and unity, and then to control the protest. So if people are happy, they will not go and protest. But then at the same time, when you see the developments, you see the investment they are making, large part of the investment goes only to the infrastructure, building roads and all. Investment for the education of Tibetan people and also for the protection of culture is only about 2 to 3% of the big budget investment they are spending. So actually economic development is not really bringing the legitimacy and the loyalty they want to conquer from the Tibetan people. So that's again a failure. So what happened next? For China, Tibet, a sense of belonging, I as a Tibetan, that's the biggest challenge. So that's the residential building is the one of the mechanism to bring up the idea that you are not Tibetan, you are Chinese nation. Some parents even have to take away their children and run away in the forest to hide from that forceful, enrollment in that imposition. But what happened is in that schools, you have been forcefully abducted in the school and separation from your parents so that you couldn't speak Tibetan language. So now we see a different kind of videos that are coming from Tibet where children are like, we are not Tibet, we are Chinese. So that they are brainwashed and learned from the schools.
Right, right. And that erasure of identity that was mentioned. Sana, just very quickly, I mean, could you compare for us countries like India, the UK, United States, you know, a huge diversity of languages, you know, but they're not doing the same sort of thing, separating children from their families, closing down any local schools that might be teaching those language.
Absolutely. I think it's just not about Tibet. If you look at China, the whole of China, there were a number of autonomous regions. And one of the way for China to reunify the entire country was to impose the language and the culture of Hans. So I think for the legitimacy and the survival of the CCP, what they believe is that all the population should identify themselves as Chinese, should not have a religion, and should speak one language. So the uniformity, consensus, believe in one party system is something that they believe is going to lead to the survivability of the CCP.
Okay. Now, on July 6th, Tibetans around the world celebrated the Dalai Lama's 91st birthday. However, more and more, even outside of China, these kinds of religious expressions, which help reproduce the Tibetan faith and culture, are undergoing a clampdown. In Nepal, for example, the government faced, quote, domestic criticism for just such a Tibetan community birthday celebration. Former Nepali foreign ministers and Nepal's former ambassador to China and the Communist Party of Nepal raised complaints, resulting in this statement from the foreign ministry. Nepal is committed to the One China policy. Nepal remains steadfast in its established policy of not allowing its territory to be used against the interests of any neighboring country or any friendly nation. So what do you think when you hear that and read that kind of statement, Dolma? Does it surprise you?
Yes, in the sense, the former prime minister, I was reading about this actually, and it's quite interesting to find that some of my friends, Nepal, when you read, they have a different political party, right? Then people have a different opinion about China influence in Nepal. So former presidents, a former foreign minister who wrote about this is, irony is that during his term as a former foreign minister, and their government allowed the celebration of His Holiness birthday, because in Nepal there are many communities, especially at the border, they follow Tibetan Buddhism, so there are also Tibetan refugee community. There is a increasing China influence that led to the suppressions of Tibetans. For example, the National Uprising Day, day commemoration. That kind of activity is now banned in Nepal. But His Holiness birthday is celebrated. But what the former foreign minister has tweeted about His Holiness is a false information, in the sense. His government, he is targeting the current government and try to create, divisions and among the Nepali, particularly toward the current government.
So you're saying it's not anti-Dalai Lama. You're saying it's more that it's anti-government.
Yes.
However, it wasn't just that one individual. There are also some others. I mean, do you when we look at the allegation? Whose territorial integrity was compromised with a birthday party in honor of the Dalai Lama?
I think from Chinese perspective, any public acknowledgement of the Dalai Lama and Tibet means that it's undermining Chinese territorial so-called claims and sovereignty. And I think this is an old age practice from the Chinese side. Whenever an event that is commemorating the Dalai Lama's birthday, or even generating awareness about Tibet, Taiwan, Xinjiang, it's just about setting a precedence that you cannot talk about Chinese internal affairs, you cannot talk about core issues that are very important for China.
Do you think this sort of self-expression is taking it a little bit too far? I mean, is Nepal allowing, for example, China to dictate things within Nepal's own boundaries? So, is this a sovereignty issue for Nepal? Can we actually look at it in that way?
Absolutely. And I feel this is, I think, one of the first time that we are seeing this elite opportunism in China as well. That how Chinese embassy, they have kind of made their ways into the opposition, and the foreign former minister, former prime minister, and people who were considered elites are talking about how such events were organized. So they're talking against the government, but also we have to see the Chinese approach, that how they were able to penetrate into the system. And of course, I don't think that this could happen in any other country. We cannot really see this happening in a country like India, United States, or in fact, any other South Asian country apart from Nepal and Pakistan. But I just believe that it's just that how Chinese, and Nepal is just next door. So how it's also very important for China to curtail any Tibetan activities that are happening in the periphery as well.
Okay, talking of the United States, Marco Rubio's very short ex-post last year, wishing the Dalai Lama a happy 90th birthday, triggered basically an attack by Chinese spokesperson Mao Ning, who asked him to stop meddling and said, as is widely known, the 14th Dalai Lama is not a pure religious figure, but a political exile engaged in anti-China separatist activities under the cloak of religion.
我们要强调的是，西藏自古以来就是中国领土不可分割的一部分。
How dangerous? We can see that this is cultural expression sort of being securitized outside of China. They're referring to the Secretary of State in the US tweeting. How dangerous is it that Beijing is deliberately blurring religion and politics in the form of the Dalai Lama?
Yes, China, as we see, when they speak about His Holiness, including the Secretary of State's, birthday wishes for His Holiness, and also including the reincarnations. There are a lot of irony and paradox going on because China is an atheist. CCP is an atheist party. They don't believe in religions, yet they want to interfere in the religious matter.
They don't believe in reincarnation, do they?
Absolutely. So His Holiness has said, first, if you want to interfere in the my reincarnation, first, why don't you go and find Mao Zedong reincarnation? But that is one thing. But what I wanted to say is they don't believe in religion and they want to interfere. And then irony is also that they call His Holiness as a splittist and call him demonize him with a different kind of name. But at the same time, they want to have a control over his reincarnations, religious, and also, like you mentioned, the kind of the securitizations of the cultures and religion outside China. So it's China for Tibetan, like I mentioned in my first point, everything, including His Holiness, including identity, is securitized. For them, it's a matter of the national security. So yes.
Okay, we're going to have to end it there. Thank you so much, Dolma Tsering and Sana Hashmi, for joining Taiwan Talks today. If you liked our show, please search for us on YouTube, give us a thumbs up, and hit subscribe to our channel. Thank you for watching the show today. Stay safe and see you next time.